Dealing with triggers. This is something I'm going to talk about today because we hear the word triggers used a lot, and I want to clear some of the confusion. Hi, my name is Rochelle Walsh. I'm a complex trauma therapist, and I have a program, Joyful and Present, where I help Christian women go from overwhelmed to calm and confident in their emotions. Usually when we hear the word triggers, trigger warning, or we hear someone say, I got triggered, or, this person or this place is usually a trigger for me. Usually what we are hearing the common wording of that or reference to is an external trigger. So something on the outside, something that we hear, see, smell, something that we encounter either with other people or in other environments that reminds us of something from the past, or that we get dysregulated internally when we are in response to. So this is an external trigger. And typically people try to avoid external triggers. So maybe if they've had a car accident and this one stretch of highway is really anxiety producing for them, then they will learn to take an alternative route. Or sometimes you will hear people describing something, maybe in online media, they'll write trigger warning and then a colon, so that people or say trigger warning, this kind of content, letting people know that I'm about to describe something that's triggering, that may be related to trauma. So if you've had this particular kind of trauma, stay away from that. So avoidance is one of the ways that a lot of people try to deal with external triggers. And we're going to talk a little bit later in the video about why this is so unhelpful, what we really need to do to resolve trauma. But what we're saying basically is that in my nervous system, in my body, in my brain, in the back of my mind, in the recesses of my mind, there's something bad or hard that has happened. And now when I'm exposed to that certain thing, person, place, event, all of a sudden, I am dysregulated. And if we are triggered, then that means a trauma is not yet resolved. So, really avoiding that trigger doesn't necessarily do anything to help reprocess the trauma. So avoidance is actually one of the worst things that we can do with a trauma trigger. If we continue to avoid that and don't really go into working through that particular incident or trauma, then it's not just that we, can't go over that one stretch of highway or whatever, be around that one certain person. What it means is that trauma is held in our body, in our nervous system, and it does still tax our system, even if we're avoiding being triggered. So that's the thing I wanted to say about external triggers. But I also want to talk about the other, probably more common source of triggering that nobody seems to talk about much because it's harder to see. It's harder for us to pinpoint and put our finger on, but that is internal states, internal triggers, as opposed to out there, the person I see or the event or the location. But the internal trigger is something that is usually, it can be within our awareness, but is oftentimes in our subconscious. So things that are outside of our awareness. So for instance, certain body sensations or certain memories or certain mood states or emotional states, feeling states. So inside, when we had the experience of having traumas and unresolved traumas, and all of us, let's just be honest, like all of us have something, right? We have internal states that trigger us and it can make us start feeling certain things or thinking certain things. One of the reasons that this is so true is that our mind wants to put meaning and attach meaning to body states, familiar body states or sensations. So if you are familiar with the literature in trauma that talks about how our body holds sensation and nervous system responses, then just know that those are, again, out of our awareness in the subconscious. So when our body starts experiencing, let's say, a familiar cocktail of cortisol and adrenaline, our mind then will go to, and what is the threat, to try to explain that sensation. So oftentimes what's happening is familiar emotional states and, fight or flight, stress response reactions are being triggered by internal states, and then we're assigning outside meaning to try to make sense of it. Or, people can wake up and they just say, I wake up with feeling this angst in my chest, or knowing that I was restless all night. And when this is happening, again, in the middle of the night, the subconscious is processing through material trying to make sense of it. Similarly, like an internal trigger may happen when, let's say that someone had a really bad experience with, let's just for instance say someone was mugged at one point and there was a certain smell or cologne or something that the assailant used. I'm just trying to make it very, oftentimes more subtle than this, but trying to make it very explicit just for the purpose of illustration. So let's say that later that person gets on an elevator and they don't even realize it, but there's someone in the elevator that had the same cologne or something, and the subconscious mind, the alarm system, the brain picks up on that and says, danger, danger. And so the person has, again, this is an example of an outside trigger, right? An external trigger, the cologne, but out of the awareness. So the person may have not even realized that they are all of a sudden overwhelmed and feeling anxious because of a smell, because it's something the subconscious picked up on. There's so much in our sensory experience that our brain is picking up on that we're not even consciously aware of. So then all of a sudden the person starts sweating or feeling nervous and feeling anxious, and then that internal state, then they recognize, oh my goodness, I feel like I can't breathe, I got to get out, I'm trapped. That's why triggers can be tricky, is because sometimes it's out of our awareness. So the person may say, for no reason, all of a sudden I was on the elevator and I all of a sudden started feeling really anxious and fearful. So they may feel like it just doesn't make sense. And a lot of times that's things that are in our subconscious that are past traumas. Now, the only way to really not get triggered is to really work through those incidents that were traumatizing or those states. So you might ask, well, if it's out of my awareness, how do I work through it? Because I might not know that it's there. This is really where the power comes in learning to work through the body, through the nervous system, up with trauma, with anxiety, with chronic stress. When we're talking about emotions, feeling states, nervous system regulation, we're talking about how to turn off the fight or flight response. And that is always a bottom brain process. And so I just really love when people come to understand that, because oftentimes they feel like, I've been learning, I've been praying, I know all the things, I know what I should think, I can look around and see that I have a safe life, but I definitely don't feel it. My body definitely doesn't agree, and I'm constantly triggered by too much noise or too much sound, or the holidays or whatever it may be. And what they don't realize is that these triggers are just evidence that there's something below the surface. And when we can get down to that bottom brain and start calming that nervous system just through this sensation, because we might not have conscious awareness of why all of a sudden we felt overwhelmed or why certain situations are difficult for us. And when we work through the sensation by calming and stilling and breathing, we're signaling to the body that we are okay. Actually, we're using the body to signal to the mind and the mind to the body. We're learning to be still and calm. Even though we're having these reactions, we start to shift those response patterns. So rather than saying, I need to avoid that stretch of highway, or I need to avoid this, or I'm not going to this, or I don't want to listen to this because that is triggering, we're working through the sensations to get a different response. It's the way our brains are fashioned, is that we can actually change previously held associations just by changing the response patterns. So if there's a thing that's scary or triggering and we move into that thing and our body starts responding and we start to feel that fear response, but then we're able to shift and do something different and send a different signal to the nervous system using our mind by being present of what's going on and making new associations. We can change those triggers. We don't need to go back and back and back and keep retelling the same trauma or story in order to change a nervous system response in the here and now. So if, I tell people to look at triggers as providing information. What information does it provide? If you don't know exactly where it came from, or you don't know why it is a trigger, it's okay. You don't need to know that to be able to change it. But what you do have to know is you have to be aware of it. You have to be aware of it, and you have to look at the responses. You have to change the responses, and then you have to do that consistently. And once you can change the responses, something will no longer be a trigger. So I hope that's helpful. Tune into my videos if you'd like to hear more on trauma and anxiety and mental health. And if you're interested in watching a free masterclass I have, Secrets of the Calm Mind, go ahead and check out that below. I have a 90-day program where I help women break free from chronic overwhelm, burnout, anxiety. So love to have you listen to that if you're interested in knowing more. Bye.